Hello, good evening. His actions cost more lives than they saved. The conclusion of a report into a British spy who operated at the highest levels of the IRA during Northern Ireland's Troubles. Violent conflict lasted for 30 years between loyalists who wanted to remain part of the UK and Republicans who wanted a united Ireland. The IRA killed people suspected of leaking secrets to the security forces. The Troubles ended with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. An investigation called Operation Kenova has been examining the activities of Freddie Scappaticci, codenamed STAKEKNIFE, who worked inside an IRA unit tasked with identifying British agents like him. He was reputed to have prevented hundreds of deaths, but today's findings put the figure far lower and link him to the murder of more than a dozen people. Mr. Scappaticci, who died last year, always denied that he was STAKEKNIFE, as our correspondent Sarah Gervin reports.
Don't take any more photos of this house, I'm telling you now. Because if you do, I'll come out and do you.
This is Freddie Scappaticci. His double life personified the so-called dirty war between the IRA and the British state during the conflict in Northern Ireland. Pictured here during the Troubles, he was the IRA's chief interrogator, trusted to find informers inside the group. It was a role that saw him linked to numerous murders. But despite his seniority in the IRA, incredibly, he himself was a British agent, codename STAKEKNIFE. Findings from an interim report into his actions were revealed today.
Claims that he was responsible for saving countless or hundreds of lives are hugely exaggerated. Most importantly, these claims belie the fact that STAKEKNIFE was himself involved in very serious and wholly unjustifiable criminality whilst operating as an agent, including murders.
32 people were considered for prosecution in connection with the STAKEKNIFE case, but no charges have been brought due to what's been described as insufficient evidence. That decision has caused frustration.
Freddie Scappaticci should have been prosecuted for offences, and he was not prosecuted. And in my view, that is something that forever victims, certain victims, will be regretful about.
Today's report had 10 recommendations. 2 called for apologies to be made from the government for failing to stop preventable deaths and from the Republican leadership for the IRA's abduction, torture and murder of those it suspected of being informers. Sinn Féin was the political wing of the IRA throughout the Troubles.
I am sorry for all the lives lost during the conflict without exception. Regrettably, the past cannot be changed or cannot be undone. Neither can the suffering, the hurt, or the political violence of conflict be disowned by Republicans or indeed by any other party to the conflict.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, said it wouldn't be right for the government to comment at this time. Families whose loved ones were murdered by the IRA because they were suspected informers didn't want to appear on camera. A solicitor acting for several of them explained why.
The stigma for the tout or informant runs very deep in Irish history. That stigma extends to the next of kin and the next generation. Indeed, if proof were needed of that, we need only look around this room today. There aren't any families.
Questions around state involvement in Troubles deaths have haunted the government for decades. Operation Kenova investigated one of the murkiest periods of time in Northern Ireland's history, but it's a time that may never truly see the light. Well, the story of Agent STAKEKNIFE of Freddie Scappaticci has become synonymous with the complexities of the so-called dirty war between the IRA and the state during the Troubles. Today's report has raised a lot of questions about the morality and legality of what was going on back then, and most importantly, who knew what about it. But realistically, those are questions we may never get full answers to.
Sarah, thank you. Sarah Gervin.
John Boucher first embarked on this. He said the truth would be a difficult and elusive prey. His report now out, But how much of that elusive truth does it lay bare?
The security forces repeatedly withheld and did not action information about threats to life, abductions and murders in order to protect agents from compromise. As a result, murders that could and should have been prevented were allowed to take place.
Named but not confirmed as Agent STAKEKNIFE, make no mistake, this now dead Republican is the main character in this real-life story of spying, murder and betrayal.
I am Freddie Scapitici. I'm sitting here today with my solicitor. I'm telling you I'm not guilty of any of these allegations.
Keep yourselves off. Stories just make up. Don't be holding your hand up and saying it's nothing to do with you. Don't take any more photos of this house, I'm telling you now.
Of course, Scap, as he was known, was always in and around the upper echelons of republicanism. His eyes and ears missing nothing for his antlers, was guilty all along. This investigation has been looking into Scapitici's dark double life, with the Army's Covert Force Research Unit and the head of the IRA's Internal Security Unit, or the so-called Nutting Squad. His job within that, to root out informers, torture and execute those who spoke to the enemy just like he did. These, some of the faces of those whose brutal deaths form part of this inquiry. Now revealed, Scapitici murdered more people than his intelligence saved, busting the myth that he saved hundreds of lives. Kenova put the actual number down to high single figures and low double figures, and does not take into account of the lives lost as a consequence of STAKEKNIFE's continued operation as an agent. Not only that, this spy ignored his handlers and did things he should not have done, and when very serious risks were run.
The claims about countless lives being saved by STAKEKNIFE are inherently implausible and should have rung further alarm bells. Any serious security and intelligence professional hearing an agent being likened to the goose that laid the golden eggs, as STAKEKNIFE was, should be on the alert, not least because the comparison is rooted in fables and fairy tales.
The IRA's responsibility for all the deaths examined certainly wasn't glossed over. But it was the role of state players that was the biggest revelation, and investigators were scathing about the handling of agents at the height of the Troubles. Kenova found the approach maverick, discovered cases in which one agent murdered another, and killings which could have been prevented but weren't, to protect an agent, effectively turning a blind eye. 10 recommendations out of Kenova to try and heal some of the wounds of the past. They include a day of remembrance, an apology from the government to the family of the victims, and an apology from the Republican leadership on behalf of the Provisional IRA for the abduction, torture and murder of victims.
What each legacy victim has endured should be acknowledged, and where the information exists, they should be told what happened. There is a responsibility on all of us in authority to make sure this occurs.
Plenty of uncomfortable reading in this about some of those involved in our dark past. A past so dark that those who operated in the shadows remain there to this day. Sharon O'Neill, UTV Live, at the Stormont Hotel, Belfast.
Nobody will be prosecuted as a result of the multi-million-pound investigation into the activities of the army agent known as STAKEKNIFE, widely presumed to be the late Freddie Scappaticci. He operated within the IRA. An inquiry has been running since 2016. It's officially called Operation Kenova and is due to report its findings soon. But ahead of that, the Public Prosecution Service has said no one will be charged with any crime, and they've accepted victims' families will be disappointed by that news. Let's understand more with the help of our crime and justice correspondent, Julian O'Neill. Glad you're here. This is a notorious case. We know that. Where does today's announcement put it, though?
Well, we now know for sure no one will be held accountable for the actions and the activities of Freddie Scappaticci. Go back to 2016, John Boucher, when he became head of Operation Kenova, said he wouldn't be doing the investigation if I didn't believe I would get evidence to see a trial. He said, whether I do, time will tell. We now know the answer to that. There was a little bit of kickback today from the new head of Operation Kenova, Syrian Livingstone, who said it was unfortunate the PPS has been talking about people still alive. That clearly is a reference to the death of Mr. Scappaticci last year before the decision could be made about him. Kenova saying that they felt they had built a strong case and they're now frustrated that it will never be tested in court against anyone, be it former associates of Freddie Scappaticci or indeed his army handlers. Kenova said there's now determination to provide family reports and deliver them the full truth. That's where the focus will now shift. The interim findings of Operation Kenova will be published next Friday, and I think today ramps up the pressure on that report to deliver, because ultimately this entire investigative exercise will be judged against information recovery for those families, and it will be against that we will value whether it has been worth those £40 million.
Julian O'Neill, thank you very much.
Freddie Scappaticci didn't shy away. He was front and centre of the IRA. He was tasked with hunting out agents as part of the feared nutting squad. But all along, he himself was the agent codenamed STAKEKNIFE, the jewel in the crown of the intelligence services.
One army agent interrogating other agents. And in all of that grotesqueness, if you like, of that dirty war, the army have someone in the middle of this, not tied to the chair, not pleading for mercy, not speaking his last words into some tape recorder, but running the show.
You see Scappaticci here at a Republican funeral for one of the Gibraltar Three. He lived and operated at the heart of that community in West Belfast. Unbeknownst to those around him, he was a paid informer, earning £80,000 a year. Former IRA man turned author Richard O'Raw's latest book focuses on Scappaticci and believes you can't underestimate the intelligence he was providing.
As head of the internal security unit, all operations in Belfast, all major operations, not all operations, didn't all go through him, but all major operations in the Belfast area had to go through him beforehand. So he was actually in many ways running Belfast, and if he was running Belfast, the British forces was running Belfast.
The security services went to great lengths to protect STAKEKNIFE. People lost their lives to ensure his cover wasn't blown. The question still remains, who decided who lived and who died? And in the eyes of the intelligence services, was the information he provided so great that it justified those killings? And for the IRA, unlike so many other informers, STAKEKNIFE was never tortured and murdered.
There was his predicament and there was their predicament. Because if they'd shot him and accepted that their internal security had been completely compromised, then the next question inside an organisation like that is, well, if him, who else?
Scappaticci was stood down from the IRA in 1990. In 2003, he went on the run after being outed in a series of newspaper articles. At that time, tapes emerged of an interview he gave to ITV nearly a decade before, where he gave an insight into the IRA's internal security unit.
Standard procedure is to strip them and debug them, right, just to see if they're wired up or whatever, right? And they usually put a boiler suit on them then after that, right? Put them in a chair facing the wall, right, and then go from there. They get you into a room, they blindfold you, right, they strip you, they have you sitting there, right? Maybe the room's cold, they make you all sorts of promises, right? And everybody being what they are, everybody's a breaking point, you know? and they think they're going to go home, but they don't.
Scappaticci was never out of control. He was always in their control. They had a special unit set up for him. He saved a few people, but my view is that he condemned a lot more than he ever saved.
Very few know what the intelligence services do, never mind become part of it. Scappaticci managed to straddle being spy catcher, while at the same time being chief spy among his comrades. This shines a light on a very murky world that existed during the Troubles. Jordan Motes, UTV Live.
Well, John Boucher called on the government and the Republican leadership to apologise. Our political correspondent Vicky Hawthorne has been following the reaction to the report, and she joins us live now from Stormont. So Vicky, what has been the response to the calls for those apologies from the government and the Republican leadership?
Well, Paul, this afternoon the Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, issued a statement in which he talked about how this was an interim report, the Kenova report today, and not the final report, and how some matters are still being considered by the courts. And for that reason, he said that the government wouldn't be getting into commenting on what the report findings were, but did talk about offering sympathy for victims, specifically of terrorist organisations. So no apology from the government today, at least. As for an apology from the IRA, John Boucher very firmly placed the responsibility of that at the feet of the Republican leadership here. And very quickly after today's report was published, Michelle O'Neill, the Vice President of Sinn Féin and of course First Minister now, she gave a press conference here at Stormont. She said that the IRA does no longer exists, but she also repeated words that she used when she became First Minister here just a few weeks ago, in which she apologised for all the lives lost during the Troubles. But she also went a little bit further in acknowledging the role that Republicans played in the violence of the past.
I am sorry for all the lives lost during the conflict, without exception. Regrettably, the past cannot be changed or cannot be undone. Neither can the suffering, the hurt, or the political violence of conflict be disowned by Republicans or indeed by any other party to the conflict. I am sorry for every single loss of life, and that is without exception. That's for every person who was hurt or impacted by our conflict. And I think it's important that today, as the Sinn Féin new generation, Good Friday Agreement generation leader, that I will repeat that for those families.
So Vicky, how have the First Minister's words been received?
Well, the SDLP leader, Colin Eastwood, has said apologies, words aren't enough. The Irish government, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, saying that Sinn Féin should unreservedly apologise and say that the violence of the past was wrong. I then asked the Deputy First Minister, the DUP's Emma Little-Pengelly, this afternoon whether the words of her partner in government, Michelle O'Neill, went far enough for her.
I think the Republican leadership need to be very clear. There was always an alternative to this. They have to be clear that what happened was wrong. The murder and torture of their own community was absolutely wrong. There's one thing to say that we are sorry for all deaths. Of course we are sorry, and everyone is sorry for all deaths. It's deeply regrettable, but that's very different from saying it was wrong, it should not have happened. There was always an alternative, and of course people need to step up, because at the very heart of this report is victim-centred.
Vicky, live at Stormont as always. Thank you very much.
The report calls for apologies all round. Respectfully, for some families, this does not really cut it. In some ways, it represents a soft landing. As an alternative, we say the report actually signposts a way forward for a full public inquiry into state penetration of Belfast Para ISU Internal Security Unit during the conflict.
Good evening. An investigation has found that an army spy operating at the heart of the IRA during the Troubles probably cost more lives than he saved. Operation Kenova was examining the activities of STAKEKNIFE, the codename of Belfast man Freddie Scappaticci. This afternoon, Sinn Féin apologised for all lives lost during the Troubles. The Secretary of State said he wouldn't comment at this time on behalf of the government. Our Crime and Justice correspondent, Gillian O'Neill, has more.
Operation Kenova linked Freddie Scappaticci to at least 14 murders in the 1980s. While operating at the heart of the IRA as a paid army agent, he was a valuable asset, providing high-quality intelligence. But he cost more lives than he saved. An uncomfortable truth for those who ran him.
Any serious security and intelligence professional hearing an agent being likened to the goose that laid the golden eggs, as STAKEKNIFE was, should be on the alert, not least because the comparison is rooted in fables and fairy tales.
Kenova was a £40 million criminal inquiry into STAKEKNIFE, his IRA associates and his army handlers, but it put no one in the dock, and government policy around agent identification meant it could not say what everyone by now knows. STAKEKNIFE was Scappaticci.
STAKEKNIFE's identity has been disclosed to Kenova, subject to obligations of confidentiality, which I remained bound by, and I cannot make his name public without official authority. Thus far, the government has refused to give such authority, and so STAKEKNIFE is not named in this interim report. However, this position, in my view, is no longer tenable.
The report called for apologies from the IRA and from the government because state forces on occasion took no action to save lives in order to protect their asset.
I'm not surprised at the information which is contained in this report, but that doesn't make it any less terrible. And for the families, I think today must be an enormously difficult day. But I'm very, very glad because I can see that on this occasion John Boucher got further than many others have got in terms of information retrieval out of some of the agencies who really can be very reluctant to give information.
I think it's really important to state that Kenova does not end today. This is a very important day, a significant milestone, but Kenova continues. We will deliver answers to families. We will give individual written family reports that give specific circumstances about their loved ones.
There will be a final Kenova report, probably sometime later this year. It promises to be much more detailed, meaning the final word on Agent STAKEKNIFE has not been written.